Greetings to you in the name of Yahweh, the Hashwar Hebrew name for Jesus. I'm Michael Hoshaya, and I'm with you today to continue in the series Revelation in Light of Daniel with a supplement video to part 6. And it is entitled Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, the Little Horn. Now, just as a quick recap, we have transitioned from Daniel chapter 2 and Nebuchadnezzar's dream of this statue right here into Daniel chapter 7, which Daniel described the very same empires but with animalistic identity. In other words, he references them to animals, except for the fourth beast, which he has no name for, and he is just very horrific. At any rate, we have learned that the head was Babylon, and the chest was Medo-Persia, the waist and belly was Greece, and the legs were Rome, and then it had continuations, which are the toes, which were made of potter's and clay and all that. And so, however, what we've done now is gone into Daniel chapter 7, which we just said, and we've learned that the lion was none other than Babylon, and the bear was none other than Medo-Persia, the four-headed leopard was Greece, and this ugly thing here was Rome. So we've also discussed that now is the time, if you haven't been taking notes, you really should take notes. This is the critical point. We have began counting the heads of these beasts that Daniel mentions, and it is very important because it applies to Revelation chapter 12 and 13. And so what we've learned is that the lion, who was Nebuchadnezzar, is one head. And then the head of the bear was Cyrus, which is one head. And then we learned that the four heads of the leopard, was none other than Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy, which were the four generals under Alexander the Great who died and left no heirs. So the empire was busted up into four parts. One governing over Greece, Macedonia, the other one in Syria, Egypt, and all these places like this. So Cassander died and Lysimachus died, and that left two empires. But at any rate, we see right here we have 6 heads altogether. Except we're going to learn for this little guy on the next video. But for right now, your note should show 6 heads. This is very important. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start discussing why we're doing a supplement video. There was a gentleman, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, that came out of the Seleucid Empire, and he did some pretty nasty things. But these things are mentioned by Daniel in chapter 8, which we also learned was about the ram and the goat. The ram, of course, was Medo-Persia. Nobody could defeat him. And then here comes Greece, boom, beats Medo-Persia, and the big horn in the forehead of the goat breaks off, we're about to read shortly. And then 4 kingdoms, 4 horns sprouted up, which represented Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. So with that being said, let's learn what happens after Cassander and Lysimachus lay dead and Seleucus and Ptolemy are remaining. But let's see what Daniel says in chapter 8. We're going to begin in verse 8. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great in Greece. And when he was strong, the great horn was broken. That's Alexander. He died of a fever in 321 BC in Babylon. And for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. This is Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. And out of one of them came forth a little horn. It didn't say it came up beside them. It said it came out of one of the 4 horns, which waxed exceedingly great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. The pleasant land should be interpreted as Jerusalem. And then it says, and it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. The host should be recognized as the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, the Israelites, whatever you want to call them. And they were under oppression under this guy, Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. So before we go learn about how he has fulfilled all of these things, let me go ahead and show him to you. We're going to introduce you to Epiphanes himself. This guy is Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes, and he was a nasty dude, and he did some things that would fulfill the scripture in Daniel chapter 8, which is what we're about to learn. We're going to go to a couple of pieces of information here to explain how some of these things that he did that we read about actually fulfilled those scriptures. So with that being said, we're going to go and look at a piece of information that comes from Josephus Flavius, who was a historian back in, I forget what year it was, but he's an ancient historian. I've read a lot of his materials, and you really have to use discernment because some of the stuff he says is way out there in left field, but some of it, like this right here, is spot on and corresponds with all of the other information that is out there about Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. So we're going to read a little bit here. It says, however, in that citadel, that would be the temple, dwelt the impious and wicked part of the multitude, from whom it proved that the citizens, that is the Israelites, suffered many and sore calamities. And when the king had built an idol altar upon God's altar, in other words, he came in, he was trying to tell the Jews, you got to give up your God, you got to give up your belief system, and you've got to worship our gods. And that's what he was telling them. But of course, they said, no, we're not going to do that. So what happened is he come in and showed his authority and his power, went onto the temple complex on the Temple Mount, up to the altar of God, and built an altar to Zeus on top of it. And then we read what he did next. He slew swine upon it, and so offered a sacrifice neither according to the law nor the Jewish religious worship in that country. We know that according to Leviticus chapter 11, that the swine and other animals are unclean. And if they're unclean, you cannot sacrifice them or offer them on the altar of God, since God said that they were unclean to the people. And he told them that they should not eat them. But we're not going to get into that. If you would like to know all about the animals and unclean and all that, I have a series which you're welcome to join and look at. Please do so. I recommend that, and you'll understand why. You actually gain some answers to some questions that you may have. But without further ado, he slew swine upon it. So when he killed the pig on the altar that he built on God's altar, it defiled God's altar. So then this guy, he goes around and he literally takes his blood, he goes inside the pig's blood and slings it all around the temple. And then he force-fed the priest to eat some of the pork that was sacrificed on the altar of Zeus on top of the altar of God. So when it is defiled, the people can no longer use that altar or that temple because it has been defiled. So by this action here, Antiochus took away the daily sacrifices. This is what he did. He exalted himself over them. So let's continue on. He also compelled them to forsake the worship which they paid their own God, Yahweh, and to adore those whom he took to be gods, Zeus and all the other pagan deities, and made them build temples and raise idol altars in every city and village, and offer swine upon them every day. He also commanded them not to circumcise their sons, and threatened to punish any that should be found to have transgressed his injunction. This goes all the way back to the book of Genesis, and the promise that God gave to Abram that his descendants would be as multiple as the stars in heaven or the sands of the sea. And what Abram was supposed to do was circumcise himself and all his descendants, even his servants, to show that he agreed with the covenant, thereby binding the contract. And circumcision was the way he was supposed to do it. If you are a Jew, you are supposed to be circumcised, period. And it's supposed to happen on the 8th day of the child's life. And science has proven that to be when a person's immune system is at its highest. So, at any rate, he cast the host, which is the Jews, the Israelites, down, and he stomped on what they believed. He stomped on their traditions. He stomped on their commands from God. And when he says he would threaten to punish the people, no, what he actually did is if you were found to be circumcising your child, you and possibly your child would be killed. So Josephus kind of put it lightly. Let's continue on. He also appointed overseers who should compel them to do what he commanded. And indeed, many Jews there were who complied with the king's commands, either voluntarily or out of fear of the penalty that was denounced. It goes on to say that he gathered up all the scriptures that he could find and he burned them. And if the family was found to have had some of these scriptures, he would take them, burn them, and if he didn't imprison the family or sell them into slavery, he would kill them. So he was really getting his point across, and this is very important to recognize the brutality and the violence of this, because it is one of the identifying factors that is going to take us all the way through up to Revelation chapter 17. So at any rate, let's look at this little piece right here where it says he also appointed overseers, people who would do what he commanded. Well, there's a little piece of information that I also have here, which we're going to go take a look at. My bad. We're going to go over here. It is right there. Wonderful. Let's read this little piece of information. Up to the time of Antiochus IV, the office of high priest had been hereditary and held for life. However, Jason, the brother of the high priest, offered the king a large sum of money to be appointed high priest. Antiochus needed the money and made the appointment. Jason also offered an additional sum to receive permission to build a gymnasium near the temple. In other words, he was bringing in Hellenism, the games, the Olympic games, where we get our Olympics from, the running and the jumping and the throwing and all that stuff. He wanted that there in Jerusalem. So he was supporting Hellenism being brought in. And let's see. This shows the pressure toward Hellenism. Within a few years, Menelaus, a priest, but not of the high priestly line, offered the king more money to be named high priest in place of Jason. And he stole the vessels from the temple to pay Antiochus what he had promised. This shows you how Antiochus was appointing people in power to positions of power, such as the high priest, who all the people of Jerusalem would listen to. And he put them in power so they would do what he wanted to do. And this is how this confirms the information that we just read from Josephus. Also, Antiochus built a statue in the Holy of Holies and attached his face to it. It was a statue of Zeus, this guy right here. But what Antiochus did is he took the head of the statue off, because Greek culture, when they built many statues to their rulers, the Romans did the same. You could take the head off of a statue and put another head on it, which would put another individual's face upon it. So what Antiochus did is he removed the head of Zeus and put his own face upon that statue, which was in the Holy of Holies of the temple. Now, I'm not sure if you understand how the temple complex of Solomon was built, but if you remember through the Exodus, the people were commanded to build a tabernacle, which was called the tent of meeting. And then when you read in about Solomon, when he built the temple in the Holy of Holies, the glory of God filled the temple and ran the priests out. This is where the priest would go before God, where God was at in the Holy of Holies, and he would make atonement for the people one day out of every year. And this is how Solomon's temple was set up. You had the entranceway here, and you had the lever where people were to wash and so forth. And here was the altar that Antiochus built the altar of Zeus upon, and then took the swine and the swine's blood, and sorry about that, and then he slung the blood all inside the temple. But what's happening here is this section is the Holy of Holies. As you can see, Holy of Holies. This is where the Ark of the Covenant was supposed to be. The Ark of the Covenant in the Old Covenant is called the mercy seat. This is where God would meet with the priest in the temple. So when Antiochus came in, he turned around and he built a statue of Zeus with his face upon it in the Holy of Holies, showing that he was God. That should ring a bell. If you've read anything about the end time prophecy, you'll remember that Christ said that, hey, when you see the abomination of desolation, that spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not to be. So that means prophecy must be fulfilled again and again and again. It is not tied to one specific event. Nonetheless, that's another topic. We'll get into that in some other series of videos. So here it is that Antiochus built a statue of himself proclaiming to be God. Antiochus. So now that we understand that, we can understand the scripture where he equaled himself to the prince that is God of the hosts, or Yahweh, if you want to consider it Christ. So you have the Father working through the Son, Christ, making Yahweh. That's another video. Sorry about that. At any rate, he lifted himself up and he exalted himself not only in his heart, but to God by placing his face on the statue of Zeus in the temple. So here it is that we understand that the little horn from Daniel chapter 8 here that came up out of one of the horns on the goat's head, which was the four generals that broke the empire into four pieces. One of a little horn came out of one of them. It was Antiochus IV Epiphanes that came out of the Seleucid Empire. And he was very cruel, as we've just learned. But what we need to pay attention to here, and this is the whole point of learning about the little horn called Antiochus. The point is this. The idea behind Antichrist is to do everything against Yahusha, the Messiah, the Christ, the Anointed One. And here it is that Antiochus did that very thing. But it's the way he did it that we must pay attention to. Because the idea is based on one principle, and that principle is this. Believe like I tell you to believe, or you will pay the price. That is what Antiochus IV Epiphanes did. This is historical fact. I'm not making this up. Theologians across the world all believe the same thing because history parallels with the scripture. Scripture always comes first, and you look for evidence afterwards. In this case, Antiochus IV Epiphanes fulfilled the scripture. And by doing it, he went in, he told the Jewish people, you're going to forget your God, you're going to forget your commands, you're going to forget your rituals, and you're going to forget your temple, because I'm your God now. You're going to believe what I tell you to believe, or I'm going to kill you. Keep that thought in your mind. Write it down on your notes. You can make a separate little piece of paper, notes, whatever. The little horn, Daniel chapter 8. Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and make sure you put that thought there. If you don't believe like I tell you, I'm going to kill you, because this is coming up to be very, very crucial and critical to understanding the book of Revelation. I hope you've learned something here. Make sure you take your notes. Again, it's very important. We have covered 6 heads, and we found our first evidence of Antichrist behavior, which is Antiochus IV Epiphanes telling the Jewish people, you're going to believe like I tell you, or you're going to die. Until the next video, I appreciate you being here with me. Have a good day.